So today, the topic is based on a quote by the Buddha. In the Anguttara Nikaya, in the Sutra, the Book of Four, towards the end, there is a saying recorded of the Buddha, where the Buddha shows some trees and tells, I believe, Venerable Ananda, that Ananda, if those trees had a mind, then those trees too can get enlightened. Now, when we were looking for the topic, I gave some options to Dr. Manori. My original topic was understanding the mind. And that was, of course, not as interesting. And Dr. Manori chose this topic instead. So thank you, Dr. Manori. We were reflecting on what was the Buddha trying to convey by this message. Many a times people feel that enlightenment is something hard. You need a lot of past merit, and almost like the aligning of the stars and the moons, the conditions should be right for you to get enlightened. However, when you look at the discourses, the Buddha has always been very clear that in order to get enlightened, you need to be, for us as humans, you're already born as a human and you have the potential because you have the mind. And his reference to the trees was in line with this. If those trees had a mind, they too can get enlightened. If you think of a tree as a stationary object, you know that human beings can actually do very complex activities, and you have a very complex mind and a brain to support that. And if a stationary tree with a mind can get enlightened, which means that you don't need a very complex mind to achieve enlightenment. One almost contradictory thing that comes through the scriptures again and again is where the Buddha has indicated the simplicity of enlightenment, whereas we see it as a very complicated thing, so complex and difficult that we believe this birth, we could only, if at all, try and get to maybe one of the fruits of the path, like Sova, but getting to enlightenment almost seems to be impossible. But was that how it was pitched at that time? This statement of the Buddha gives one to understand that enlightenment seems to be something broad-based in potential at a mass level. It looks like it is accessible. It looks like it is reachable. It looks like it is attainable at a mass level. And then maybe at the time of the Buddha, we did see relatively high number of people indeed getting enlightened. But also another statement of the Buddha where he took some sand on his hand and then shook it off and asked Venerable Ananda, if you think of the sand on this earth, he referred to the planet, and if you think of the sand caught in my nail now that I shook it off, what is more? Is it the sand underneath my nail, or is it the sand and the rest of the planet? So obviously, Venerable Ananda says it's the rest of sand on the rest of the planet. And the Buddha says that indeed, and in this way, the number of people who will get enlightened are like the sand under my nail, even though the potential number of people are like the sand on this planet. So again, he makes a reference that if you're born a human, you have the potential to get enlightened. Then what seems to be the problem? Because most of us who like to be on the path, like to believe that we would like to get enlightened. Then what seems to be stopping us? Well, one thing seems to be that a lack of deep interest. We seem to be having somewhat of a superficial interest, where once our work is done, household chores are done, children are attended to, and then holidays are also done, and then if I have time, that is when I will commit to putting some effort towards enlightenment. So the reason I chose this topic was to try and inspire you with the possibility that it is right there in front of you. That is how the great master has put it forward. He also at some place said that one should try for it like your head is on fire. If your head is on fire, you will not be thinking about it. You will just jump into action and you will not stop until the fire is doused. And that fire he equaled to the fire of sensual pleasures and aversion and the fires of ignorance, the lobha, dvesha, moha, that we are getting burnt by every day. So what is the solution that he found, which no other human had found in this world up to that time, 2,500 years ago? Today, when we look at the original word of the Buddha, of course, it is there in the sutras. But for a layman like me, I rely much more on what I hear from erudite monks, because I feel that they have spent more time, they have prioritized this, and I can learn something easier and faster by them. And my first meditation master, Venerable Homagama Konanya Thero, who has now passed away, his master was Venerable Ajahn Cha. And in the book, A Still Forest Pool, which is quite a known book for many, Venerable Ajahn Cha refers to his practice, how his practice evolved. His practice started like how it would start for you and me, where we put a lot of effort into concentrating our mind. So if I may, I would like to actually read out a small passage. The monk says, in my third year as a monk, I had doubts about the nature of samadhi and wisdom. Really desiring to experience samadhi, I strove ceaselessly in my practice. This reminded me of Ananda Thero, who also was practicing ceaselessly before the first, what is it called? The first council, thank you. As I sat in meditation, I would try to figure out the process, and therefore my mind was specially distracted. When I did nothing in particular and was not meditating, I was very peaceful. But when I was determined to be peaceful and concentrate my mind, I would become extremely agitated. What is going on, I wondered? Why should it be like this? After a while, I realized that concentration is also like breathing. If you determine to force your breaths to be deep or shallow, fast or slow, breathing becomes difficult. But when you are just walking, not aware of your inhalation or exhalation, breathing is so natural and smooth. In the same way, any attempt to force yourself to become tranquil is just an expression of attachment and desire, and will prevent your attention from settling down. As time went by, I continued to practice with great faith and growing understanding. I sat and watched over and over again. So what he found out, and later he describes it in other chapters of this book as well, is that there are two sides to the mind. You can almost say that the mind has two natures in it. The first nature is what we are all so familiar with from birth, the flowing nature of the mind. This part of the mind is what, when our six senses contact with sense objects, and the whole five aggregates process takes place, we flow with it. But there's another part of the mind which we don't pay much attention to. And this is where lies the secret, which is not a secret anymore. It's been out there for 2,500 years. But the realization of this individually is almost like individually you are discovering the secret of your mind. The other part of the mind is described as the one who knows, the knower. The mind that is flowing is the doer, the knower and the doer. How do we, and for a person who is not familiar with this, how do we help the person to identify the knower? Again, thanks to various erudite monks in their many talks. One monk explains this and says, when you wake up after a nap or after you are asleep, when you wake up, there is that moment when you know that you are awake. That moment you know you are awake. That is where you get to see the knower. You know that you are. That is your consciousness, your awareness. And when we say present moment awareness and all of that, this is what we are referring to. That part of the mind that knows. Then there's the part of the mind that flows like a monkey jumping from one thing to another. And when the Buddha said the mind is like a monkey mind, this is the part that flows. As sense objects come our way, this mind flows from one to another. And with each sense object, desire arises, aversion arises. And from our birth up to now, a strong sense of me, myself, I has got entrenched. Me, myself, I. And that is the ignorance. A strong belief of there is me, I am seeing, I am hearing, I am tasting. So where is the fire and where is the peace? If you just pause and think about it, even for a few seconds, when you move to the state of knowing, it is peaceful. When you are in a state of flowing, that is the fire of desire, the fire of aversion, which is originated due to the fire of ignorance, misunderstanding that these are things I can control. These are things I like and dislike. These are things that is good and bad, right and wrong. And this is something you can practice. And during today's talk, I would like to actually have a few short minutes of practice. So let me inspire you by what Ajahn Cha continues to say. One day, the Pharaoh says, I was meditating sometime around 11 p.m. in the night. My mind naturally entered into a deep concentration. It just happened. I thought to myself, why is it like this? I felt tranquil. My mind was firm and concentrated. There was a festival going in the village nearby. I could hear the music, I could hear the party. When the mind is one-pointed, and if I think about the party going on outside, I can hear the music. But if I then come back into the concentrated mind, I don't hear the music. It was quiet. And for a change, I thought, I will do nothing. I will observe. I will be the knower. Just knowing what is happening. And the mind started going inside. The mind started going inside. On that occasion, my mind was not interested in anything else. It was just still. When I stopped, I asked myself, am I lazy? Is that why I'm stopping? Am I tired? Am I restless? No. The mind was just still. When I stopped for a rest, it was only the sitting that stopped. My mind remained the same, unmoved, as I lay down, as my head hit the pillow. There was a turning inward in the mind. I did not know where it was turning, but it turned. Like an electric current being switched on, my body exploded. And my body broke into small pieces. And there was nothing in my body thereafter. And I just watched. Passing that point, the mind went in further. I was merely an observer. And once it was over, I asked myself, what was that all about? And the answer for me was, there doesn't have to be an answer to every question. This is a discovery of your own mind. Why don't you rather go in that discovery? Just go in that discovery. And here the subtle difference is, Venerable Ajahn Cha is staying in that space of the mind, which is the knower, without going into the thinking part of it, which is what we all are so used to doing. When a sense expression comes our way, when a sense contact comes our way, it proliferates with our thinking. So this is simply practicing to do nothing. Many a times I have heard that Venerable Ajahn Cha says, your practice is to do nothing. And I must say that I couldn't understand what does do nothing look like. And I think this splitting the mind into two and to say that one is the knower and the other one is the doer, where it is flowing all the time like a monkey mind, I think that is the subtle difference that we also require to understand. And this then happened a second and a third time at the time this narration was written. The second time also, he said, the mind just decided to get concentrated. And he just observed. And the mind went in. And again, the body exploded into small pieces. And I feel that when we are doing the Vedananupassana, we feel those sensations, the tingling effects and so on, where the mind, where parts of the body is indeed disintegrated. We never allow that whole process to continue, because we get distracted and we start thinking along those distractions. So this is all about being able to stay in that awareness place as the knowing person. The third time the mind went in, the whole world broke apart. The earth, grass, trees, mountains, people, all was just space. Nothing was left. When the mind had gone in and abided as it wished, stayed for as long as it could, the mind withdrew and returned to normal. There was nothing to compare it with, because there was nothing. And at some place in this book, The Still Forest Pool, he mentions that he finally understood what held subject and object together. What held subject and object together? It was all held together by this misconceived notion of me, myself, I. And when you go inside your own mind, and when you see there is nothing, and you realize that this is all just a process, then that whole perception that we have built around a person that we hold so dearly to ourselves, and it is this person who gets excited, who gets sad, who gets scared of the future, who regrets the past, when that person has no basis to exist. When you are only in a place of knowing, and the rest of the world is functioning, and you are in a place of knowing, it is peace. I would suggest that let us practice this and see, because ultimately that is what is required. And when our patron, Venerable Jnanasija Thero, shared the Sabbasava Sutra 2 weeks ago, even that sutra, in the sutra, the Buddha alludes to this. Because if you really look at this, what are we mostly bombarded by? The sensual pleasures or the lack of it, which causes the aversion. And the cankers, right? Or the chankers, how do you call it? Cankers, the cankers, which there were 7 ways the Buddha had recommended for overcoming those. The first one was insight, where you understand that this belief in self is the problem, is the cause of the suffering, the belief in the self. And then the self-restraint. Can we restrain ourselves when a sight reaches the eye, a sound reaches the ear? So if we are here in this hall, listening to a talk, if we see something that would distract us from this, if we hear something, do we go with the flow? Training our mind to restrain our mind all the time becomes so important. And to the monks, the Buddha recommended that the way you use your food, the robe, the medicines, and the dwelling is only for practical purpose and not for indulgence. And cultivating your mind with the right effort, so that every awakened moment, we put the effort to stay in the place of the knower and not get carried away with the doer. Now imagine we have spent all our lives where we haven't cultivated the mind to this extent. So the natural habit is to go in the flow. Many monks in their books, they refer to that this enlightened state is already present within us. It's just that the mind forgets itself and gets carried away down the stream with the sense objects. So in order to really let the original mind be illuminated, the knower to be illuminated, we have to go upstream, go against the desires to flow with the sensual objects. And of course, being lay people, this is quite challenging because our lay life is all about, it's designed, if you look at the modern world, it's designed to please the senses. But for those of us who believe that time is running out, life is precious, and we need to attempt this, possibly what we can do is, there is many a moment in our day where we can actually remind ourselves and come to that, the person who knows. How I try to do this is whenever I'm in an agitated state, and it's quite a lot of those states when you're working or when you're at home, to remind myself that let me go to the knower, be the knower. And suddenly for a moment, you feel peace, just for a moment. And you forget and you start flowing again because it's so habitual. So the practice is very clear. The more we do this, the better we will get. And a new habit gets formed of being the knower and not the doer. So I suggest we take 5 minutes and practice. And I'll give the instruction and then stop the recording so that anybody who is listening to the recording later on, they will not have 5 minutes of blank space. What we will do is, this links to what we call the present moment awareness. Recently somebody asked, what is present moment awareness? So I asked the person, forget present moment. Do you know what awareness is? How are we aware? And the person said, I haven't thought about it. So I said, the Buddha has explained that we are aware because of our 6 sense doors. Actually, until I read that, I also didn't think about it before. And that shows how amazingly these things are laid out by the Buddha in such a simplified manner. Our awareness comes through our six sense doors: eyes, ears, nose, tongue, body, and the thinking that we do. So present moment awareness is then focusing on the sense doors in the present moment. And doing that from the knower point of view. So let us see how we can do this. Let us close our eyes. When we close our eyes, because the biggest distraction is the visual distraction. It's very hard to experiment with anything when the eyes are so active. When we close our eyes, and because we are seated now comfortably, we can assume that the tongue door is also temporarily closed. We are not eating or drinking right now. The eye door is definitely closed. We can also safely assume that the smell door is also closed. There's nothing good or bad, right or wrong to smell right now, I believe. Not in this surrounding, I believe it will be the same for you all as well. So then there are three sense doors that are active right now. The ear, we can hear; the body, we will feel any discomfort or the comfort of the sitting posture, and of course our mind. So let us observe the present moment through the ear first for a couple of minutes. And then we will observe it through the body based on what we can feel. And lastly, let's observe it with all of the three sense doors: the ear, the body, and the mind. So I will pause the recording for a moment. If you think about things that distract us, in the Sabhasava Sutra, I just like to draw your attention to a couple of things. One is to endure. Right? Now, when you are meditating, even though we meditated only for about 5 minutes, sometimes in this hot climate, you can have a fly coming and landing on your nose. And whenever that happens to me, I find it very, very agitating. So I would make it go. But the Buddha's instruction is, you need to endure. You need to endure these things because this whole trying to control these minor irritations during the meditation, right? So endure things like a fly, a mosquito, cold, heat, hunger, thirst. That is when you sit down and you decide, I am going to meditate for half an hour, 10 minutes, or so on. To be able to stick with it. So why do we feel we need to stop the meditation and chase the fly away or get some water? Or it's all that habitual need of fulfilling those sensual desires. As they arise, we fulfill them. We have practiced this all our life. As they arise, we fulfill them because we identify with them, that this is my needs, and therefore I need to look after myself. But this whole practice is about trying to develop a new habit. Avoidance. Now, here the examples are things like a ferocious dog, a deep hole. But I think in today's society, what we might have to avoid is sometimes there are friends that the mere association with them can take you away from the path. And those are the things that we have to be mindful about. And also certain events and activities that we are a part of can also set us back sometimes from the practice. So being mindful of those and having that clarity that all my life I have been feeding this erroneous view of myself, And that is the reason I am in the state that I am. The feeling of helplessness, hopelessness, fear, anxiety, suffering, fear, and all of that. And it only needs, we need to remind ourselves to be the knower. During, whether it is work or in the family encounters, what I also do is, let's say with my children or something, when I'm getting agitated, and when I realize that I'm agitated, because the whole thing is, if you can do something only if you know that you are being agitated. It's to, for a moment, to come back to this knower, know that agitation has come into the mind. And for that brief second, there is a pause. And medically, what we have found out about the brain is, there is an emotional part of the brain and there's a logical part of the brain. The prefrontal cortex, which is the logical part of the brain. When you pause, when you are aware of your emotions, you automatically switch gears to the logical part. When you are aware of an emotion, you switch gears to a logical part. When you get carried away by the emotion, that is when you are not aware of the emotion. And that is why we have a post-mortem where we think that, oh, I got carried away with my fear. I got carried away with my fear. So the practice of this, as much as possible, and that's what the Buddha mentioned. He said the practice should be when you are eating, when you are drinking, when you are sleeping, when you are walking, in your day-to-day activities. Whereas we feel that the practice is when we are sitting down. Now, many of my teachers have told me that the sitting meditation is very important because it gives you a firm opportunity to practice these things at length. But the real proof of the pudding is when you're out of the meditation mat and when you're going about the day-to-day, how do you retain this? How do you retain this? So none of us are going to get an A star on this. And therefore we feel demotivated. And most often we just, we feel it's just too distracted. It's always about feeling agitated. In fact, the more I observe, the more I realize that I seem to be agitated all the time. And then I was like, is it now that I'm agitated all the time, or was I agitated before also all the time and I just didn't know it? Now that I am observing, I'm gradually realizing most of the day, very minor agitations, but there are agitations all the time. And just knowing, just observing is building a small practice, It's a small snowball. It will take time for it to be a big snowball, big enough to crush all the defilements in a major avalanche. But it is a small snowball. We all have it, all of us. And this talk today, and this is why I told Dr. Manoli, let's lock this in whenever there's an opportunity, because this is to inspire. There is a small snowball in all of us. We need to start building even more. Every moment of every day, whenever you remember, is when we need to practice. Let me stop. And yes, ask for any questions. Let me first take any questions from the Zoom participants. Any thoughts, any comments, or any questions?
Yes, Nadeesha, I would like to ask and mention also about the knower, the seer, and to see whether that is the same as the thinker, which I don't think so. Thinking about something is quite different from knowing something. That's a direct experience, whereas thinking about something is indirect, and you will label or an idea. It's something that has to do with the past. It's not in the present. Whereas seeing and knowing, in that sense, is always in the present. What do you think?
I think, yeah, so for the people in the audience, let me repeat that. So Venerable Ananda asked a very, very good question. The question is, there's a knower, there's a seer, and there's a thinker. Knowing is in the present moment, seeing is in the present moment, whereas thinking is different. It's not part of the seeing. And Venerable Thero asked whether what I think about. I think I captured the question right, Venerable Thero.
Yeah.
So what I feel is, and I think you might be able to give better clarity into this. So you're absolutely right. What I have understood is when I see something, I then start to think about it. When I hear something, I then start to think about it, and that whole the five aggregate process, the proliferation, and all of those things happen automatically. I do believe that what you are saying is true. The seeing happens in the present moment. The hearing happens in the present moment. And if we refer to what Udu Iriagama Dhammajiva Thero said in the last talk, I actually found when writing the minutes of board talks together, how useful board talks were actually to relate to this. Dhammajiva Thero said that, are you able to see and hear and still be aware of the walking, if you are walking? Are you able to hear and still be aware of the breath? And I feel that whole hearing and the seeing is the place where the part of the mind then gets hold of it and starts to flow. At the point of seeing and hearing, if we wait with that awareness of, I know I'm hearing, I know I'm seeing, then the rest of that proliferation part doesn't take place because you have stopped at knowing. The mind can't do two things at the same time. So it will either flow or it will either be the knower, right? When it is in the flow, the seeing, we start thinking about what we are seeing, whether we like it, whether we dislike it. Am I going to do something about it? Am I going to go and talk to that person I saw just now? That whole process takes place, which is what we are usually practicing habitually. But with the seeing, when we become aware that I'm seeing, I think this is what the Buddha referred to as sight is only sight, sight is only sight. And you just know that you are seeing, and you stay with that awareness. Then you don't get into the thinking. Would you agree, Venerable Thero?
Yes, I think so. Whether seeing and knowing are two different things is still a question. Maybe it's the same thing,
Yes.
actually.
Yes, yes. So again, to the whole audience in the whole, the Thero says yes. But whether seeing and knowing are two different things, so is it the same thing? It looks like it's the same thing. I think you are right. I think the moment we are seeing, we become aware that we are seeing. Dr. Manoj, would you like to add something?
Actually, in that sense, I'm not really talking about seeing with the eyes, but
Yes.
when you are looking, so to speak, at your mind, for instance, or you're looking at something with your, not so much with the thinking mind and not with your eyes, but with awareness. But that awareness and that seeing is the same.
It's the same.
Yeah, awareness, knowledge, knowing,
Yes.
etc.
Absolutely, Swamina. Sadhu, sadhu. So
And
the
one
audience
more,
wants to know.
one small thing I would like to just mention. When I was in London recently, in September, I went to the 89th birthday celebrations of Venerable Sumedho at Amaravati. Yeah, and he's still keeping very well. He gave a good speech. He's still quite fit.
Fantastic. That's amazing. I'm so glad you did that. I would have loved to be there. Thank you. And you have also contributed a lot, Venerable Thero, to my journey. I always tell you, you are one of my teachers as well. And I'm very deeply grateful for Venerable Theros like yourself. So the audience is curious about what the Thero said. So what the Thero said was, it's not about seeing with the eye, but when you are seeing inside your mind and you become aware, that it's the same thing. And that is absolutely right. And Venerable Thero also mentioned about seeing Venerable Ajahn Sumedho for his 86th birthday. 89th birthday in London. And we all know that Ajahn Sumedho is one of the probably the closest disciple or the student of Venerable Ajahn Cha, who came and brought Ajahn Cha's knowledge out of Thailand into the Western world, I suppose, for the first time. Thank you so much.
Yes, in Amaravati, not just
Amaravati.
London, but in Amaravati.
Amaravati tradition. Sad. Anyone in the hall? Any thoughts? Anuja, we are seeing you after a long time. Anything you would like to share? I think that's something that's Thank you for that. So, Anuja just shared something that Dhammajiva Thero said last time, that as the breath touches the tip of the nose and the lip and so on, and you also hear a sound, it's a distraction. While hearing the sound, you can still be aware of the breath, that it is possible. So, Anuja, you are a seasoned practitioner of the Anapanasati meditation. And she was confirming that that can be done, and it's a good tip that the Venerable Thero shared. And I think that is where the Thero mentioned that that is when samatha transcends into vipassana, where you are aware beyond of focus in the mind. You are aware, and I believe it links to what we shared today also about you knowing that the mind is distracted, yet the body is breathing. Right? And we know that the mind cannot bring two things at the same time, so it's crossing at a very fast pace. But we are maintaining that awareness, that knowledge. Let me just check in the chat whether. Okay, so there are two thank you notes, and one person wanted to know the title of the book which I mentioned, A Skill for a School by Ajahn Cha. This book is available free of charge on the internet. You can download the PDF version of this book. And thank you for everyone who has said who appreciated the talk. Thank you. Okay, so in that case, shall we close for today? Venerable Thero, would you like to do the passing of the merit to the devas and the departed relatives, please? Thank you so much. Akasattha Chibummata Devanaga Mahindika
Punyang tang anumodita tirang rakkhangtu loka sasanang. Akasatta cha bhummata devanaga mahindika. Punyang tang anumodita tirang rakkhangtu desanang. Akasatta cha bhummata devanaga mahindika. Punyang tang anumodita tirang rakkhangtu mang paranti. Ettavata amhi sambadang punya sampadang sabbe deva anumodantu sabba sampatti siddhya. Ettavata amhi sambadang punya sampadang sabbe bhuta anumodantu sabba sampatti siddhya. Ettavata amhi sambadang punya sampadang sabbe satta anumodantu sabba sampatti siddhya. Idang me nyati nang hotu sukita hontu nyatiyo. Idang wo nyati nang hotu sukita hontu nyatiyo. Idang wo nyati nang hotu sukita hontu nyatiyo.
Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. Much merit, Venerable Thero, and much merit to everyone who joined. I will then close the session. Sarvan sir.
Irvan sir.